All right, good afternoon, everybody. It's kind of exciting to see a relatively decent turnout for what must be one of the most boring topics. At least I'll try to not make it the most boring session. But I'm here to talk about building solutions on Liferay DXP in a post-GDPR world. My name is Dennis Ju, and I'm glad to be in front of you guys here today. All right, so look, it's October 9th. May 25th is long gone. It's been already 4 months. But how many of us can really say that our organizations are GDPR compliant? Don't raise your hands. I don't want you guys to be embarrassed. But in reality, it's probably something around 25% of organizations can truly say that they are GDPR compliant. Okay. If you figure out how to get this to advance. All right. And that might strike you as a bit odd because 5 months ago, it seemed like every tech news site was flashing these headlines saying that GDPR is going to bankrupt your company, that it's the new Y2K, that doomsday is coming. And it was like an era of like mass hysteria and FUD. At least for those of us in the enterprise tech world, it seemed like the end of the digital world was coming. So there were companies that invested millions and millions and millions of dollars to implement all sorts of GDPR compliance policies, while others, and I would say the majority of us, we probably underwent some modest policy changes and kind of chose this wait and see approach to see, exactly how things would fan out once May 25th came and went. And then there were other organizations like the LA Times that said, GDPR, no problem. And we'll just block all European IP addresses, call it a day, and move on with life. Well, now that it's October 9th, if we were to kind of look back on these last 4 months, and if we were to be honest, the ensuing fallout from GDPR seems somewhat anticlimactic, right? There's no major multi-billion-dollar lawsuit. Google and Twitter and Facebook, they seem to be doing just fine. Except for maybe Facebook stock, but the others are doing pretty good. And even with all the supposed increased technical security measures that GDPR was supposed to impose, British Airways just underwent a massive data breach. And it seems odd because GDPR was supposed to be the most dramatic advancement in privacy laws in pretty much the entire modern age. But if you look at Google Trends, yeah, May 25th, everybody was, cared a lot, and they were really scared about GDPR. But if you look at today, it seems like we're right back where we were about a year ago. Right? It seems like nothing's changed. So what happened? Was GDPR a total bust? Was it a failure, a dud, a flop? All bark and no bite? Well, I'm standing here to kind of ring the town bell and to proclaim that data protection laws are coming. Now, strictly speaking, it's true. GDPR as a legal document, it's a total mess. If you guys have tried to read through the 200 pages and the 99 articles, it uses all sorts of vague language like undue delay. Like, what is undue delay? Disproportionate effort. And what's proportionate? What's disproportionate? Reasonable measures. He uses reasonable, I think, some 30 times throughout the articles. And you got to ask, what's reasonable, what's not reasonable? If somebody invokes the right to be forgotten, do I need to go get my offsite tape backups and scrub every instance of that user's name, reload these all into my system? How far do we have to go to implement some of these policies that GDPR has incorporated? Well, as much of a mess as it may be, right? Love it or hate it, GDPR was really just the beginning. Right? It's really ushered in this whole new era of privacy, and I would say at right around the right time. Countries all around the world are actually passing their own localized version of the GDPR. Right? In Brazil, we have the General Data Protection Law going into effect February 2020. Bahrain has the law on the protection of personal data going into effect August of next year. India has the Personal Data Protection Bill. And it's coming here too. to the US. California just recently passed their Consumer Privacy Act, and already on the Senate floor, there's all sorts of bills similar to the GDPR that have been introduced, and it's only a matter of time before some variation of GDPR is going to come to your business, right? Regardless of whether or not you actually do business in the EU. So it doesn't really matter if we know the intricate details and the ins and outs and the exact applications of GDPR law, because the principles of heightened protection for consumer and user data, that age is here. And that's what I meant by this title. We're here building solutions, but we're on the other side of GDPR. And it doesn't matter whether it's GDPR or any other law. It just means from here on forth, kind of the Wild West heyday of being able to do whatever you want with personal data is over. Right? We are in a post-GDPR world. So you know that, and you're here to figure out, how do I make my organization compliant? Well, you're in luck, because I've got 4 easy steps. Yeah, if only it were that easy. I mean, obviously, it's not going to be 4 easy steps, contrary to all these articles you'll see about 4, 7, 10, 12 easy steps to GDPR compliance. But I am going to talk to you about some of the features that we've added and some of the technical quick wins and principles that you can apply to your solution to make sure you're in line with the heart of GDPR. But before I do, there's a couple of points I really need to reiterate, and it's something that I've reiterated in every presentation on GDPR that I've ever done, which is 2. This is just my 3rd. Number 1. GDPR compliance is not a one and done, check the box, one-time task. It's an ongoing, continuous journey. Right? You're never done with GDPR compliance. Right? It's kind of something like IT security. Right? It's not a binary question of, are you secure or not, but it's really a continuum of how secure are you. Right? The more sensitive, of course, your industry or the data that you hold, right, the greater your security measures need to be. And just because your organization was really locked down and really secure 5 years ago doesn't mean that you guys are still secure today. Right? There's a need to continuously, in an ongoing way, evaluate how secure your organization is, and GDPR compliance is the same. Right? Number 2. To the relief, I'm sure, of some of the technical folk in the room, GDPR compliance is not solely, nor is it even primarily, IT's responsibility. The law says that it's technical and organizational measures that need to be taken, and this is going to involve pretty much every department within your organization. So if your boss sends you to this session looking for some turnkey solution, some configuration settings, some app you can deploy or buy that will magically make your organization GDPR compliant, well, you can go back to them and say, teamwork makes the dream work. We're in this together. It's not just about the technology. Right? It's really the way that your entire organization maps, processes, and treats data, user data collectively. So let's jump into some of the things I want to cover today. And I'm going to start with the new tools that we introduced in 7.1, which have just recently been backported to 7.0. So everything we talk about here will apply to you even if you are on 7.0, if you install the latest service pack that was just released, I believe, a week ago. So the way that we approached some of the features to start adding into 7.1 and 7.0, so we poured over the text of GDPR, was not fun. And we looked for, right now, what are the technically most complex or difficult tasks to tackle on the Liferay DXP platform that are explicit technical measures that you need to take. And we landed on a couple. I'm sure you guys have heard of both of these. A couple of technical requirements that deal with subject access requests. Basically means when one of your users or customers comes to you, they have certain rights endowed to them by the GDPR. And the two that we decided to tackle, we decided, hey, these could be technically challenging to implement. Was number one, the right to erasure, also known as the right to be forgotten, that's Article 17, and the right to data portability, Article 20, which is a user's right to come to your organization and say, I want a dump of all the personal data that you have on me, and it needs to be in a machine-readable format. And the idea was you can take this dump and give it to, the user can give it to maybe a competing service, and they can get that data basically moved over to another service to prevent vendor lock-in. At least that's the idea of it. The reality of it is probably far from that. And I'm not going to bore you with kind of some of these bullet points about the user data management tools that we added. I'm just going to jump into a demo. But just really quickly, what we've done is we've provided both a UI layer as well as an API backend that basically allows you to write the custom logic that you need to figure out how do I get the user's personal data out of the applications that you've written. It's fully integrated with a service builder and provides base implementations. But even if you don't use service builder, the APIs are all implementable and with any app, with any backend. And one of the great things about 7.0 was the modular architecture made it so that all of these tools are just a separate module. It does not need, you don't need to touch any of the code in your existing application. It's just another module that registers and knows how to deal with your existing, the other modules' data. So instead of just talking about it, let's go into a demo, and I hope this, all right. So let's take a real world-ish scenario. So what I have here is a sanitized clone of community.liferay.com, which I'm sure many of you guys have been to and used. And this is a very typical use case for Liferay DXP. And if anybody's been on community.liferay.com, I'm sure you're all familiar with our Liferay legend and all-star hero of our community forums, Mr. David Nebinger, who's not here in this. Oh, you are here. I didn't know you'd show up. Well, I'm using some of your data without permission, but it's the US, so it doesn't really apply. So, so everybody here, if you don't know Dave, then you will find out about him pretty soon. And he is by far the most active member on our forums. He has 100 blogs, some 14,000 message board posts, and let's say, you know, heaven forbid, that Dave one day decides, you know what, he's just fed up, he's done with Liferay, he just wants to take his services elsewhere. So he writes Liferay an email and says, I'm invoking Article 20 data portability, give me a dump of all my data so I can take this and move this over to SharePoint or some other forum. So this means what we need to do is, I'm going to make this bigger, more for my sake than your sake. So we need to provide a data dump of everything on community.liferay.com that's associated to Mr. Nebinger. And we have 30 days to take care of this. So if we go into the familiar users control panel, we find Mr. Nebinger, and here in the action menu, you'll see at the very bottom we have a couple of new action items: delete and export personal data. So let's say we go into export personal data, and we're going to start a new process, add export process. And these are the out-of-the-box implementations for some of the Liferay apps that we have. And we've detected here that we have a number of blogs, documents, and a whole lot of message boards, all associated to Dave. So what I'm going to do here is go ahead and click export. And this will take just a couple of minutes. But you'll see here, and I hope I can pull this up, it's going to grab all of the blogs, and somewhere there is a Finder window. Okay, Well, believe me, somewhere there's a Finder window with a zip file that downloaded all 14,000 messages, 100 blogs, the documents and media into a zip file. And you can, if I can find the mouse, just click on the action menu, click on download, and you'll see that all of it is packaged into XML format, and all the data is there. And that pretty much, as long as you've implemented the API for user data management correctly, all of the data associated to date. And you'll notice even with 14,000 messages, it just took maybe about 30 seconds to take care of the entire request. All right, let's move on to another demo, one with the right to be forgotten. So the previous example demonstrated handling user data with Liferay's out-of-the-box apps, but most of you guys here will have built your own custom applications to address your own business needs. So for this second example, what I'm going to do is show a custom, very simple custom app that I wrote. And it's a pseudo real-world scenario. I joined the electric vehicle revolution a few months ago, not to save the environment, but because I have a long commute and and Liferay's office started offering free charging. And so I've decided to jump on the bandwagon. And the problem is our office has 4 charging parking spots, but we have some 25 electric vehicles. And so they've instituted this system where every vehicle can charge for 2 hours at a time, and then you need to move your vehicle. And the way that we're managing this is this ginormous Skype chat. And it's very, very low-tech, old-school kind of way of doing things. And one of the goals that we had is we wanted to build a Liferay app on redeploy that's going to connect to the API of these chargers and be able to automatically track how long people have been charging, make sure they don't go over their quota. And so I decided to create a very simple demonstration on DXP 7.1 for employees. And this is just a way for users to manually register their vehicle and take a look at the charge history, as well as see the vehicles that have already registered. Pretty straightforward stuff that is kind of more like a demo app that you can find on dev.liferay.com. So let's say that I, Dennis Ju, invoke the right to be forgotten. So that means Liferay needs to go in and delete or anonymize all data related to me as a user. Of course, unless there's some contractual right or some legitimate interest, there's all sorts of exclusions in GDPR. But let's say that Liferay decides, all right, he's invoked the right to be forgotten. So we're going to go into my username and click delete personal data. All right, so the very first thing that we're going to do is deactivate the user. You'll see here that we have a 5-step wizard. And the first is deactivating the wizard, which makes sense since he no longer wants to, or I no longer want to consume these services. The second step is deleting the user's personal site. And there's a bit of an assumption here that we can indiscriminately delete all the content on a user's profile pages. We believe this should be a relatively safe assumption since everything on their profile page should directly tie and relate to them. But if you want to take a look and maybe try to save something off of their pages, you can open up their profile pages here. And it's here in step 3 where we really get into the meat of the application. So when we click on review, we're looking at data that's associated to me, Dennis Ju. But we're not 100% sure exactly how to handle this data. So for example, we have a custom app here, EV chargers. And if I click on it, I see that I have registered as part of this application a vehicle that's been associated or registered to my name. And so here we have the year, make, model, license plate number. And as the administrator, as the data controller, right? It's up to you to decide, what am I supposed to do with this data? Maybe it's simple enough for me to just delete this data and be done with it. Or maybe I want to try to anonymize it, maybe for historical purposes or analytical purposes. And just a quick side note, true anonymization is not a simple process because you really need to prove that it's impossible to re-identify this data to the individual. But in this case, if I click anonymize, what I've done is I've written a custom backend, and it's going to randomize the color, it's going to change the license plate, but it's going to keep the year, manufacturer, make. Let's say, just in case Liferay wants to keep the history of the vehicles that it has registered. I also see that I have a couple of blogs, and I see kind of a brief, really short abstract. And let's say as the admin, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at this blog. So I see that Dennis that I've created this blog and just says range anxiety is real. This is me every night. He's just trying to be funny, but he's not very funny. So we're going to say, you know what? This data we don't really care about. It's not that important to the organization. So we just go ahead and delete that. But there's another blog article that Dennis wrote, tips to maximize your EV's range. Right? So has a bunch of content that you might actually find valuable and useful, and you might actually want to hold on to. What you actually need to do as an admin, if you wanted to keep this data, you actually need to somehow be able to analyze, look through this, and remove the data that might be considered personal data or somehow be re-identified to the original user. So here in this introduction, I have this short blurb, and it says, with only a couple of hours charging available and this crazy commute from downtown LA, and trying to get more range out of the 80 miles of my VW e-Golf. And so those little tidbits of data might be just enough for somebody to say, oh, I know who this person is. And so when somebody invokes the right to be forgotten and you choose to anonymize, you need to make sure that you edit and delete, remove these sorts of PII or personal data that can re-identify that user. So let's say I've edited this blog, I'm happy with the rest of it, and then after that, I click on anonymize. And what this does is it will swap out the user ID, username, and whatever other custom logic you have in your code to disassociate from the original user. Right, so we're done with at least everything that we know of that's associated to this user. So we click complete step. So we're done with step 3. In step 4, this is and this is in the documentation, but this is handling the data that you don't need to review. So a lot of it is system data, just disassociating the user from, for example, the charge history, things that the administrator doesn't need to look over to see, hey, is there any sensitive data here that I might need to edit or delete? And in the final step, we're going to go ahead and delete the user. All right. So after having done all this, if I were to go back to this page and look at the charge history, I should have highlighted there were a few, like these would have previously been under the name Dennis Ju, and it's now associated to a new user that's been created, anonymous, and that registered vehicle, I believe it was probably this one. It just randomizes or sets the license plate to a bunch of A's, renames it to anonymous. And ultimately, right, however these applications either associate or identify what is personal data and tries to figure out what can it anonymize, what needs to be reviewed, what can be automatically deleted, that's ultimately up to you guys to implement because, of course, you know best how you're storing the data and what actually needs to be done with the data once a user requests the right to be forgotten. And again, our goal here was to take a painful process and to make it at least slightly less painful. But note that even with all the tools in the world, I mean, this is a tedious process, right? And so we hope that you actually never have to use these tools. And I might be the first product manager that says, I hope you never use the stuff that we actually created. But by the time you're using this stuff, it means your users are already unhappy with your service. They want to move somewhere else or be forgotten. So I really do hope that this is one of those things that you never need to use, but when you do, it's there and hopefully powerful and flexible enough to tackle your GDPR needs. All right, 5 minutes left. Let's breeze through the rest of this. All right, search is your friend. I'm not gonna go through the demo, but you guys know search does much more. Search is able to index documents. Just for the sake of time, I'm not gonna go into it, but if I were to look, now that the user DennisJu has been deleted, if I were to go and look up DennisJu, I'd find all sorts of documents where my name is part of some archived files. And so you want to go through and use the power of search to find where else is your user's data hiding somewhere in your system, right? You want to look up not just their name, but also their email address, their phone number, anything that you think might be somewhere hidden in your system that you haven't explicitly mapped out. Consent banners. This is pretty simple, but you've seen these everywhere. They're easy to do. It takes 20 lines of code, maybe 50 with Liferay, but it's pretty straightforward. And you want to make sure that users know exactly what your privacy policy is, what your terms of agreement are. This is Liferay's standard privacy policy that we have right now. Make sure you read through it. This was our privacy policy just as of less than a year ago. And Liferay's privacy policy said that we use government-grade encryption technologies, include advanced algorithms such as MD5. If you have text like that in there, it's just inexcusable, right? It just means you've obviously not looked at, updated your privacy policy. So make sure you read through it. You'll also notice that beginning with 7.1, we no longer ship with boilerplate terms of use. And the point of this is don't use Liferay's boilerplate terms of use. Now, Apple was infamous for having this 20,000-word, 50-page EULA that they updated, and you were supposed to read on your phone before you downloaded the next app or your next song. Now, stuff like this just would not fly in today's day of GDPR. Article 5.1.a says you need to process data lawfully, fairly, and in a transparent manner. Now, if you did have a EULA that looked like this, it doesn't mean the legislators are going to immediately slap you with a 4% or 20 million euro fine. But if you're trying to figure out exactly what does this need to look like, the key thing is you want to show intent. Right? And remember, intent is 9/10 of the law, right? Or is it possession is 9/10 of the law? I'm not a lawyer. But intent is important. You want to show that you have made and done the due diligence to make sure that you are compliant. And so just to show you an example of a EULA that I thought was fantastic. Oops. What about, who else did I create a user for? Okay, well, demo gods are not with me today. But if you go to GOG.com, you will see a great example of a EULA where they have the really legalese text on one side, and then on the other side, they have a more English-friendly, human-readable EULA so that it's very clear. So just look up GOG EULA. And finally, in the last minute and a half that I have left, I want to talk briefly about minimal transparent data collection. So you want to make sure that when you collect data, you are collecting as little as possible. Here I have an example of signing up for the Analytics Cloud beta. And this is created using our form builder. So when you collect an email address, right, just make it explicit that you're just collecting this so that you can contact them. You're not going to harvest and sell to third-party marketers. You might request their name, First name I'd say is reasonable. Last name, if you don't need it, leave it optional. If you're collecting their industry, right, just be explicit. Why do you want to know their industry? Just be transparent and let the user know why you're collecting the data that you're collecting. So in this case, we're saying we're doing it so that some specialist in your industry can contact you about Analytics Cloud. And this one is easy but very obvious. Don't pre-tick these marketing agreement, promotional update boxes. Right? Leave them unchecked. Don't use confusing language like click here to stop unsubscribing from future. I mean, just make it very clear, make it simple, make it plain, and make sure that it's explicit opt-in. Right? I just actually noticed that when you signed up for Wi-Fi here at the hotel, that it was pre-ticked. I agree to the terms and condition. Right? That is okay for now here in the US, but it's only a matter of time before stuff like that will be a no-go. All right. So going over time here, but these are just a few quick tips. None of this is rocket science. None of it is really comprehensive. But these are the little steps that you can take and that you need to take to show your intent to be compliant to GDPR. Remember, just like life is a journey, not a destination, so is GDPR. It's a journey. It's not a destination. And it's something that Liferay, as a platform, we want to walk alongside with you. So, let us know what are the challenges, what are the problems that you're hitting as you're trying to be fully compliant with the law. And we'd love to hear what are the unique challenges and concerns that you're facing in your implementation. Please, if you enjoyed this session, go ahead and rate it. If you didn't, please don't. Or still can, but just be constructive, please. And I'll be up here available afterwards. Please feel free to come talk to me, ask me any questions. Thank you.